Two proper European brewed lagers easily available here in the UK, but which one should you buy? Hello and welcome back to the channel, and yes, over the past few months I've been talking a lot about Budvar and Krombacher, but it's mainly been regarding their dark lagers, comparing them on their own and then head to head. But now it's time to find out which of their original lager offerings is actually the one you should be buying. At first glance, I appreciate that these two on their own, if you take away the dark lager previous comparisons, may not seem like a really obvious set to put together. However, they are two of not many lagers in UK supermarkets right now that are actually brewed, well, where they came from. Krombacher from Germany, Budvar from the Czech Republic, and they are still made there. These aren't rebrands of stuff that's actually then made down the road. This is legit import lager at a very reasonable price. As for pricings, I'll put them on the screen now for what these generally run for at the time of editing, but to be honest, they're normally available on a multi-buy offer. I got both of these from Morrison's, so I'm not sure how widely available Krombacher is at this point, but if it's not in every supermarket, well, you can definitely get it from Morrison's, and Budvar, I'm pretty sure, is pretty much everywhere at this point in time. So yeah, you can definitely easily get your hands on both of these, and as it probably says on screen right now, at a very decent price indeed. Does that make them the best though? Well, probably not really, but I think they are absolutely solid everyday choices. The Budvar, I'll be honest, never really lets me down. The only downside to Budvar is that these green bottles it comes in can get a bit skunked. It can go off a little bit just sat in the bottle, which is a shame, and hopefully that's not happened to this one. As for the Krombacher, I always feel like I ignore it on the shelf in favour of something like this or a Pilsner Urquell, which is maybe a better beer than either of these, but that's something to come back to. However, the Krombacher, yeah, I always just feel like I don't go for it, but I thought with their dark lager that I didn't prefer it, and actually it turns out that, well, whilst it wasn't definitely beating the Budvar Dark, it was, yeah, definitely some stiff competition. Let us get into these two then. As before, I'm going to be using the same glasses as I did with the dark lager test, but this time I want to go Budvar first because, well, just to shake it up. And just before we get into it, here is a quick look at the bottle. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone will know what this looks like at this point. It's just a very nicely designed bottle of lager. Green glass bottle, as I've already mentioned, can have some issues with it, but in general, it's looking very nice indeed. And then onto the Krombacher, well, very trad, German trad, Krombacher Pils, so this is distinctly a Pilsner, whereas the Budvar is a Czech lager, although I think also would be described as a Pilsner. So they are very relatively similar, but of course from different countries, and as a result we'll probably have quite different components and little bits of style variations because of that, never mind the fact that they're different breweries. So let's get that Budvar open. I've opened that, and there is a little skunky aroma just entered the room. I'm not sure if it's going to affect the whole thing, whether it's just a little bit of the gas release, but yeah, a little bit unfortunate. Now, with Budvar, you are meant to do it a hard pour, which I kind of have, probably not perfectly, of course, but it is what it is. And then into the Krombacher. Sounded a bit flat on opening that one actually, but we'll give this one pretty similar treatment as well. Yeah, it's definitely not as carbonated. Okay, both in the glasses, both incredibly similar looking beers this time. There was quite a difference in their dark lagers. I'd say the Budvar has just got the legs on the colour a little bit. It's a little bit darker, a little bit more orange hued, whereas that Krombacher a little bit more lemony and actually just a touch hazy in comparison to the Budvar. Otherwise, it's business as usual really in terms of European lager. Nice frothy looking white head. Probably not going to stick around too long, especially given that these are German lager glasses and don't have the little bumps on the bottom, but it doesn't really matter. The beer is still going to taste fantastic, and if anything, it would actually keep the head further down as long as we swill it around the glass a little bit. So aromas on the Budvar, and as I said, it did smell a little bit skunk, so I'm a bit concerned, but here we go. Oh no, tiny bit. tiny bit. In general though, it's nice, crisp, fresh malt, beautifully grassy, slightly floral hop character. You can tell there's going to be a decent bit of bitterness in the back end of this just from the aroma. And at least, well, it's being honest, it's not going to be any nasty surprises. And right at the end, really deep down, there's this slightly mulchy, earthy funk from, as I say, it being skunked slightly in the bottle. It's just when sunlight gets to it, basically. It's not really an issue, but it can put you off your beer, and that's not great. Meanwhile, the Krombacher, distinctly less aroma, has to be said. Definitely a lot less hoppy than the Budvar. It is more, I guess, malt-centric, but even that is actually quite hidden away. It's got a bit of a sweet German bready malt thing, but it's maybe a little bit disappointing, especially after all of those Oktoberfest beers a couple of weeks back. So, yeah, I mean, relative terms, not bad at all. Right then, taste test on the Budvar. First, I'm going to try and get that head to do something, but actually it's a little bit too full. And as you can see, it is quite thin and washy in the glass, but again, it is a relatively cheap lager, so kind of expected, but let's get into it. Cheers. As I said, never fails to put a smile on my face, Budvar. It does have this almost well-considered balance in that you can tell it's not hyper premium, you can tell that it's affordable, it's available, it's meant for everyone, and at the same time it's got enough flavour and enough character to really be considered actually quite interesting. So, little kind of minified deep dive on the actual flavours though. So, up front, nice, refreshing, semi-sweet, kind of that, light caramel malt. The malt that is there is very sweet. There's just not heaps of it. It's not hugely depthy, but it is absolutely nice enough. Over the mid palate, that sweetness remains, goes through, it's quite consistent. Starts to build though, with a little bit of hop bitterness, a little bit of that kind of grassy hop nature. It's not too intense though, it's just, it's balancing out, letting you know there's more things going on in this beer. And then as it gets to the back of the tongue, the sweetness ramps up a little bit, but so does the bitterness. You just kind of get this almost crescendo of flavour intensity. They don't really change. It stays very much just kind of lightly sweet malt, bit of bitterness, nice bit of grassy hop note, and it's not doing too much, but it's doing enough, if that makes any sense at all. And then as you swallow it, you do get a big crash, as you would with most traditional lagers, where it does suddenly change up and you get that real refreshing intensity, because huge bitterness spike, the grassy note increases, also starts to introduce a few of those floral hop notes that I mentioned from the aroma. It dries your tongue out beautifully, and there is a tiny bit of that malt bill still left, just kind of swinging around the back. It doesn't taste like anything. This isn't one of those beers where I can say, actually, you know what, there's hints of lemon and, it's really bready or anything like that. It is distinctly very no-nonsense lager. Okay, we've had the grass and the slight floral note and the slightly sweet malt, but that's it. That's pretty standard across almost, not every beer, but a lot of beers. So, yeah, not much to talk about in terms of nuanced flavour profiles, but it hits, dries the tongue out, gets you in back for another sip, and as a result, you could easily get through quite a few of those, I dare say. Right then, on to the Krombacher. Cheers. Very different, actually. When you do these things side by side, you think, I'm just buying a lager. They're both lagers, they're both nice. It's doing pretty much the same job. And it is, but it's going about it quite a different way. The Krombacher does feel distinctly German. Shouldn't really be a surprise, but when we're talking about mass market international appeal, you might expect them start to converge a little bit on each other and all start to be a little bit similar. This though, front of the tongue is actually quite hop-centric. It's a little bitter, a little grapefruity almost. It's not quite lemon, and it's not intense grapefruit either. It's just that, I guess, ever so slightly sweet, but with a proper bitter and sour backbone to it that you get out of a grapefruit. That doesn't really last though, because over the mid phase of the tongue, I dare say it actually gets a little boring. Now, that's not always a bad thing when you want a proper sessionable light beer. but it's almost like slightly sweet malty soda water in the middle there. It's not very robust, there's not a huge amount to it, it's just very fizzy and a tiny bit sweet, really. Speaking of robustness though, we haven't actually mentioned the ABVs on these beers, which I should have done at the start. The Budvar kicks in at 5% on the nose. The Krombacher is a touch milder, coming in at, if I can find it again, 4.8. So there's only 0.2 between them. Whilst I'm saying the Krombacher is losing a bit of robustness, it actually has maybe some more intense flavours right at the start there, but then they wash out really, really very quickly. However, as it gets to the back of the tongue, that carbonation continues. It really is quite a fizzy beer, and it's kept its head significantly better than the Budvar. Now, one thing I do need to say, these glasses are relatively new. This one that the Krombacher in has been washed a lot more than the one that the Budvar is in, and as a result I think that might be going some way to explaining it. Remember when we opened the Krombacher, it sounded a bit flat, so maybe it's just all held within the beer and now we're seeing that come through, but yeah, it seems to be very carbonated. At the back of the tongue though, it does go distinctly more German. It's leading down that slightly bready malt profile, but I've not quite put my finger on what it is yet, but there's something, I'm not going to say not quite right about it, just not quite as, well, brilliantly German as you might hope. The bitterness from the front of the tongue actually kicks back in again, makes it a little bit difficult to dissect. Yes, the malt's amped up, but so is the bitterness. It's quite balanced, to be fair. It is a Pilsner style, so the bitterness is likely to be a bit higher than it would be in a regular German lager, of course. But that bready note is coming in. It's sitting there just maybe a little bit flat. It's not bad bread, there's just, I want a bit more of it, personally. I mean, maybe it's the mass market thing. Maybe it's just designed for everyone to enjoy it, and I think everyone probably would enjoy it. But yeah, I just want that little bit more, if I'm honest. Especially maybe to balance that bitterness out, because it feels like maybe just a touch too bitter in those later stages. Aftertaste though, you get a bit of mineral water quality as you would expect with some German beer. A few tiny kind of caramel sweet malt notes. Hop profile shows itself again. It is a little grassy actually, as the Budvar is, but the intensity kind of matches it, but the actual flavour dies off, if that makes sense. Like there's just a hint of grassy hop, but the bitterness is rather apparent. It doesn't dry your mouth out anywhere as much as the Budvar does, but that slightly kind of bitter intensity does just keep you going back for one more sip. So, where do we land with these? Well, based on everything I've just said, I think it would be fair to assume that I'm very much leaning towards the Budvar, but one thing I know from doing head-to-head tests is as soon as you have one, then the other, and then go back again, some things certainly can start to change. So, let's give it another go. The condition on this is actually quite poor, I have to say. It is really quite watery, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing to this beer, the head's not coming back. The skunky note is still there, and the beer flavour I'm preferring, but actually the condition of it, no, it's not the best. And on that note, the Budvar goes out of date on the 26th of June next year. Meanwhile, the Krombacher goes out of date on the 8th of February. As a result, there's a significant gap there. There's nearly half a year in terms of freshness difference. And despite the Budvar being the fresher beer, assuming they all had a year on them, which I think will be right, the Krombacher, well, in terms of the condition of the beer and that part of the experience, is actually running away with it. So I really am torn on this one. This is not going to be an absolute obvious go-to. I think, in my mind, that a really good bottle, not skunked, and, you know, potentially conditioned a bit better, of the Budvar would be easily the winner. But they can be really inconsistent, and it's all down, I think, to that green bottle. Every time I've had this on tap, it's been fantastic, always and forever. Whereas the Krombacher, I've actually had more hit and miss on tap with it, but the bottles are incredibly consistent. So if you're happy with a maybe less interesting but more consistent beer, head over to Krombacher. Meanwhile, if you're willing to bet on yourself getting a decent bottle when it comes to the Budvar, then overall, I think it's a more balanced and more enjoyable experience. But right now, the conditioning on this one is just that poor that, well, I think the Krombacher, despite not being exactly to my taste, is actually the more enjoyable beverage. So yeah, bit of a shocker really, but hey, that's what these tests are all about. And I think, really, that is all I've got to say about it. Which of these two do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. Or are you going to go for one of each? These are normally on those multi-buy deals you get in the supermarket, because it's 4 for 3 or whatever they do. They change it all the time. You know what I mean? So yeah, are you picking up one of each, or are you heading one way or the other? So let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, that is all I've got to say about it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already, subscribe if you would be so kind. And I'll catch you next time. Cheers.